So moving on, let's go to Venezuela.
Remember when the Democrats and others, the radical left, used to say that the people they're allowing into our country, immigrants, are nice people. They're not violent like our people. Well, they make our people look like babies. These are some of the most violent criminals anywhere on earth. From many countries, not just Venezuela. Venezuela emptied their jails into our country, but others have also. The Congo has. So many other countries have. And we don't put up with it. I have to say the drugs coming in by sea are down 94%. And we're trying to figure out who the other 6% are. But they're down 94%, and we're going to start hitting them on land, which is a lot easier to do, frankly. But these are a direct military threat to the United States of America. They're trying to drug out our country. And you can look throughout history. Look at China when they were loaded up with drugs. They were suffering greatly, and others were able to take them over. And other countries also. They're trying to drug out our country, and we're reversing it rapidly, actually.
House and Fox News correspondent Lucas Tomlinson. Hey, Lucas.
Jackie, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has just posted a statement on X reacting to that terrorist attack at the Hanukkah event in Bondi Beach. I'll read it. It says, the United States strongly condemns the terrorist attack in Australia targeting a Jewish celebration. Anti-Semitism has no place in this world. Our prayers are with the victims of this horrific attack, the Jewish community, and the people of Australia. Now, before the news of the massacre in Australia and the 3 Americans killed in Syria, President Trump had focused overseas primarily on Venezuela after U.S. forces seized an sanctioned oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela, and President Trump wouldn't rule out doing it again.
It wouldn't be very smart for me to tell you that. You know, we're supposed to be a little bit secretive.
A U.S. Coast Guard Maritime Special Reaction Team boarded a sanctioned tanker last week carrying 1.8 million barrels of oil bound for Cuba, with previous voyages to Iran. The commandeered vessel now heading to a U.S. port, and the White House says it intends to seize the oil. At the same time, the U.S. military has been bolstering its forces in the Caribbean. EA-18 Growler electronic warfare jets have arrived in Puerto Rico, along with Air Force F-35 stealth fighter jets from Vermont and combat search and rescue helicopters from Japan used to rescue downed pilots. Mid-air refueling tankers have been forward deployed to the Dominican Republic. Advanced radar has been sent to Trinidad, 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. The USS Gerald R. fresh off a port call in St. Thomas, has been positioned further south in the Caribbean. Her E-2 Hawkeyes and F-18 Super Hornets flying daily show of force missions just outside Venezuelan airspace. There are now roughly 250 Tomahawk cruise missiles aboard warships in the Caribbean, ready to strike if ordered by the commander-in-chief. At home, President Trump and the White House are fighting a battle over affordability, which many Democrats think has not been adequately addressed heading into next year's midterms. At a rally in Northeast Pennsylvania, Trump blamed his predecessor.
I have no higher priority than making America affordable again. That's what we're going to do. And again, they caused the high prices, and we're bringing them down.
The White House also wants to bring down the cost of health care.
All right, so Venezuela, right? United States seized oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela December 10th, which officials state was connected to terrorist organizations. According to FBI, it was being used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran and have been used in recent years as part of an illicit shipping network supporting foreign terrorist organizations. The Venezuelan government described it as a blatant theft, while Iran's embassy in Venezuela capital, Caracas, described it as grave violation of international laws and norms. So is Trump violating international laws?
No, he's not. As a matter of fact, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution specifically mandates what he's done or is doing. It says specifically the president or rather the commander-in-chief as it is styled, and the armed forces, quote, shall enforce the law of nations, unquote. Further, in Article 1, Section 8, it says it is the duty of the commander-in-chief and the armed forces to pursue, eradicate, and suppress piracy wherever found in the world. Article 6 of the Constitution makes ratified treaties part of the supreme law of the land. And there are a number of treaties that the U.S. has executed and have had them ratified by the Senate, so they're part of the supreme law of the land on the level with the Constitution and its amendments. And hijacking aircraft is an act of piracy. This all stems back from 2001 with 911, and you get Al-Qaeda, who was operating in a fashion that wound up hijacking several aircraft on 911, crashed four of them into targets. Well, three of them into targets, and a fourth one, due to the heroics of the passengers on board, crashed to their ultimate demise in a field rather than into an intended target. Now they don't have to hijack aircraft. They were allowed to bring their military-grade explosives across the open southern border. Now, Venezuela is caught up in a situation where their oil tankers, for great profit to Venezuela, are trafficking in oil that is bringing operating cost and taking care of expenses for extremist organizations, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, etc. So under the law of nations, those things should be suppressed and those contraband goods should be seized. The problem is nobody has had the means. Well, people have had the means, but nobody's had the will to put them to use. Now, there's an interesting thing about Venezuela, Peru, and other places in South America. At one point in the 19th century, after the U.S. tore its navy to pieces after the Civil War, Venezuela had a more potent navy than the United States did, and that became one of the factors that was an impetus for the U.S. Navy rebuilding shortly before the Spanish-American War. It started supposedly because the Maine, which was one of the warships that was built as a result of Venezuela having a superior navy, blew up in Havana Harbor. The yellow press pushed it that it was blown up, sabotaged by the Cubans or the Spanish, which it wasn't. It was defective coal that spontaneously combusted, and they used coal bunkers as armor for their magazines, and it blew the ship up because of its own deficiencies. The U.S. knew this. It was confirmed a few years later by Navy divers, and they used it to provoke the Spanish-American War because the U.S. was interested in becoming a colonial power, an imperial power, and out of that they got the American Virgin Islands, that's Puerto Rico, et cetera, et cetera. They wound up controlling the Philippines and got in a war with the Moros, who didn't like the idea of substituting one bunch of colonialists for another. And that's part of American history. So it is what it is. And there was an interesting thing that the Venezuelans did to the U.S. back in the 19th century. They seized an American ship, either hung or put the captain in front of a firing squad, and executed quite a number of the crew because they said they were running contraband to some guerrillas down there in South America. So the U.S. got very upset about it and evoked the Monroe Doctrine. So that is also another reason to be down there, is the involvement of international factors in the Western Hemisphere that are forbidden under the Monroe Doctrine, which is going on 200 years old. So it's nothing new. He's following long established American law and the Constitution of the United States of America. But it's not surprising that so much ignorant rhetoric is floating around out there because too few people read the Constitution. Very few of those elected to Congress, either the House or the Senate, have read it. In fact, essentially only 25% of practicing lawyers and sitting judges in the United States have read the whole thing, though they study elements of it in law school.
Well, do you think that we're headed to World War III? Because Trump said he's not ruling out combat boots on the ground in Venezuela and invasion.
No, it's not. That won't start World War III.
No?
No, it's not. You've got a good long few kilometers between the east coast of South America and the west coast of Africa or Europe. And if somebody wanted to come over there, that's a long way to go over some water that's patrolled by the United States Navy. And the U.S. Navy controls anything that's on the surface of the water with what they have under it, on it, or over it. So ain't nobody going nowhere. We need another couple of aircraft carriers, but we have quite a few right now. So essentially, the number of aircraft carriers we have is any one of the main units could probably sink all of the fleets that were involved in all of World War II. So that's how much firepower you've got out there. And don't forget the best nuclear submarines in the world. They sort of run everything. For real, they replaced the battleships and they are a lot more proficient. They're faster and they are basically hidden. And they run silent, run deep, run fast.
Well, I think part of the reason why Trump is seizing their oil, right? Of course, more for us. Some of that oil was
minuscule. It's just it cuts out. It really messes with the financing operation that some of our worst enemies in the Middle East have. And Venezuela was cashing in on the need to transport it for them. So that's Monroe Doctrine. In other words, you're helping out enemies of the United States and you are doing it out of your South American country. Ain't no how, ain't no way. That's called what? Roosevelt, Teddy said, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, sometimes you don't have to speak so softly.
Wait a minute. So so Venezuela and United States, there's two separate countries. So if Venezuela wants to do business, whether it's with Russia or Iran, that's their business.
It might be, except for the fact that some other country might say it's our business. And if you get the most powerful military in the world that is not stuck in a ground war someplace, that's a whole lot of havoc that can be brought to bear on the situation. In the 19th and first part of the 20th century, Great Britain ran everything because its Navy ruled the waves. So that's what happened in the 19th century and the early 20th. Now the United States is in that position and nobody else is. China has more ships in its Navy, but they're not the same kind and they're not heavyweights to slug it out. And they're on the other side of the North American continent.
Well, so a lot of that oil was going to be transported to Cuba, and Cuba needs oil.
Well, so, Cuba needs to be friendlier.
Let me say this. So the United States is financially trying to
strangle them.
Hold on. The United States is financially trying to strangle Venezuela, but at the same time, they're also squeezing Cuba as well. And that's very intentional. This is very intentional.
And also, don't forget, the problem is that the oil comes from some interest that will put the profits to use in paying for extremist activity. Those people that fled and didn't flee crashed the southern border with military grade explosives. That's how they get financed. So cut the money off. That's a lot easier than killing them.
Start of the Trump administration's pressure campaign on Venezuela, but it's the latest development since launching Operation Southern Spear, which is aimed at curbing the flow of illegal drugs into the U.S. Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is in Washington with more on these developments. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Jackie. Well, I just came from an on-the-record briefing with the ranking member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator Mark Warner spoke with the George Washington University's Defense Writers Group, and I asked him point blank if the U.S. is going to war with Venezuela. Senator Warner is a member of the Gang of Eight, and he said, I don't know. That is alarming given the amount of air power, troops, and warships in the Caribbean right now. The USS Gerald R. Ford is moving south into the Caribbean basin, further into the basin. EA-18 Growlers, electronic warfare jets in Puerto Rico to jam enemy radar and take out surface-to-air missile sites. Air Force HH-60 search and rescue helicopters deployed to the Caribbean from Japan, and 12 Navy warships.
Is the campaign against Venezuela still just about drugs, or is it now also about oil?
It has to do with a lot of things. It's going to be starting on land pretty soon.
He seems to be sleepwalking into a war with Venezuela.
Seizing an oil tanker is one thing, but what follows could be far bigger. President Trump says the U.S. will keep the oil from the tanker. It's not the first time the U.S. has seized sanctioned oil tankers. It did so with 4 tankers in 2020, Iranian oil that had been sanctioned. The Treasury Department has now targeted Maduro insiders and sanctions evaders, including sanctions on 3 of Maduro's nephews and 6 shipping companies. The seized vessel is now in forfeiture, headed to a U.S. port. Russian President Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, is reaffirming support for Venezuela's Maduro. Today, more details have emerged in the Wall Street Journal exclusive about the dramatic and nearly failed evacuation of the leading Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who has been in hiding in Venezuela and is seen here on the balcony of her hotel in Oslo, where she received the Nobel Peace Prize. She was nearly lost at sea for 3 hours after a series of mishaps by the contractor sent to help her escape Venezuela, including a fishing boat that at first broke down, a GPS that went overboard. The Venezuelan operation appears designed to remove Maduro from power, but it's not clear whether all of the U.S. government entities responsible for oversight know the overall plan and whether Congress has been fully briefed. There are bound to be questions about how Machado was evacuated and why all of the details ended up in the press. Jackie?
Maybe people need to refresh their recollection of history and read up on what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about between President John F. Kennedy and Premier Nikita Khrushchev, who, by the way, was a Ukrainian.
Well, if Russia is backing Venezuela, honey.
No, Russia is not. Russia is not what the Soviet Union was. And the other thing is that, remember, the Soviet Union was backing Cuba when we put an embargo on any shipments into Cuba to get the missiles out. It turned out to be a sucker play because Khrushchev wanted our intermediate range nukes out of East Europe. And he sent telegram that took several hours to send. I imagine it was quite expensive, and he listed the serial numbers of the missiles, the trucks, and the geographic locations where these missile launchers were positioned. Midway through the Cuban Missile Crisis, he said, you get them out and we'll take the missiles out. So
I want to swing to Syria real quick. 2 U.S. American soldiers and a civilian interpreter was killed by ISIS terrorists in Syria. So according to, Al-Qaeda says they were, the 2 U.S. Army soldiers and civilian interpreter were killed and 3 others were injured in an ambush by gunmen from ISIS terrorist group in Syria on December 13th, according to the Pentagon. A Pentagon spokesperson said in a statement on social media that the attack occurred in the central Syrian town of Palmyra, U.S. forces were conducting what?
I just gave the correct pronunciation. Go ahead.
Say it.
Palmyra.
U.S. forces were conducting a key leader engagement in support of ongoing counter-ISIS and counterterrorism operations. Quote, today in Palmyra, Syria, 2 United States Army soldiers and 1 civilian U.S. interpreter were killed and 3 were wounded. U.S. Central Command said casualties resulted from an ambush by a lone ISIS gunman. The names of the fallen soldiers and identifying information about their units are being withheld pending notification of their next of kin. President Donald Trump expressed condolences for the 3 killed service members, noting that the other 3 who were wounded appear to be doing pretty well. We mourn the loss. Trump said Syrian forces were fighting alongside U.S. forces when the incident occurred, and the interim Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, was devastated by the word of attack. This was an ISIS attack on us and Syria. We will retaliate. That's what Trump said. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth warned that any attack on U.S. forces will be met with severe consequences. Let it be known, if you attack Americans anywhere in the world, you will spend the rest of your brief, anxious life knowing the United States will haunt you, find you, and ruthlessly kill you. Jeez.
That just goes with the territory. The real problem is that the jackass Biden-Harris administration let in hundreds of thousands of these son of a bitches with their high explosives in their backpacks. Nobody checked them, and they've already planted them. So if there's any danger of a war erupting, this is what's going on. It's already in place. It's ready to go. And if they're killing somebody sniping, so to speak, in a foreign theater, they don't have to limit themselves to that now. They are already here. And these damn fools in the Democratic Party are going, yeah. It's so evil to cut this off. Well, guess what? This is what you let in. So when the shit hits the fan, we know who to blame.
Right. And the man who carried out the attack in Syria that killed the 3 U.S. citizens joined the Syrian internal security forces as a base security guard 2 months earlier and was recently reassigned amid suspicions that he might be affiliated with Islamic State group.
Yeah, I mean, nobody was checking anyone on this southern border for 4 years. They just walked in. Nobody checked their luggage. You are an American citizen. You fly in and they're going to check your luggage and run you through security. They did not. All of these people from Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda were just welcomed right in. All of these people from North Korea, from the People's Republic of China, just welcomed right in. Nobody checked them. Nobody asked them for credentials, anything. Oh, come on in, guys. The ICE forces weren't even armed because they were not authorized to do anything. They just got the hell out of the way. So for 4 years, all of this is just walking across the border. And here you are. This is a new recruit proving himself. He just takes somebody out over there. So they have many more here, not just 17 that hijacked some aircraft. They've got hundreds of thousands that have come across the border. And then don't forget the organized crime figures and the cartels and the drug trafficking. And that, by the way, is why you have a targeted oil cargo, because the oil cargo is going to be used to generate funds for the operation of Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iranian forces, etc. So you seize the money. And Venezuela was assisting them. They were being, shall we say, accessories to this. And when you've got a situation where you are conducting an embargo for military or diplomatic purposes. That was an issue in World War I. The fleet of Great Britain was stopping anybody, neutral or otherwise, that looked like they were bringing cargo into Germany, and they were diverting the ships to English ports to be inspected by English authorities and either confiscated or released, depending upon what was on board. So there's 100-plus-year-old international precedent for this. And one of our closest allies, Great Britain, was heavily engaged in it in 1914, 15, and 16, 17, and 18. So it ain't nothing new.
I want to play this clip here because this was very interesting when it comes to funding certain NGOs and terrorists.
This deal with the Somalis in Minnesota is just the tip of the iceberg, ma'am. It is, it's completely out of control. We are sending currently $40 million a week to the Taliban in Afghanistan. There's around 1,000 of these NGOs that are created, and what happens is some billionaire Soros-esque kind of person puts money in an account, $1 million, some unelected bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. sees that, and it's got a great name like, Feed the Starving Children or something. So, and they start funding them. Elon Musk told me, and I have no reason to doubt it, we probably put close to $1 trillion of your tax dollars into these things. And then it flows into the pockets of terrorists, and ma'am, they will hate us for free. We don't need to be paying the Taliban $40 million a week. But the president's aware of it. And last week, the Senate Democrats blocked the bill on the Senate floor, if you can imagine that. And you got to wonder where their loyalties are. They don't care if they burn this dadgum country down. All they want is to get their money to fund, because their wives and or their girlfriends, or possibly both, are probably employed by some of these NGOs. We better start watching this. If we're sending $40 million a week to the Taliban, dadgum, and the Somalis are ripping us off over there, it's all over the country. We better start paying attention.
All of this sounded familiar to me, so I went and did a little more research over the last couple of days on my history. And this looks very suspiciously like what the Democrats did leading up to the Civil War, where all through the South, they diverted munitions, monies, resources, and facilities away from the interest of the United States of America to what became the Confederate States, who were engaged in rebellion. And technically, considering the amount of treason that was involved, they wound up being lucky, and I suppose it was diplomatic to ease the feelings, not to put a whole lot of them on the wall and shoot them for being traitors. But the U.S. reconciled at the end of the war. A lot of people were pardoned and forgiven if they took the oath. And but it's nothing new. The Democrats did this back in the late 1850s and 1860 and 1861 to give enemies of the United States a boost on this. So they have been engaged in a lot of treasonous activities over the centuries that the U.S. has been in existence. So this is not surprising.